Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Munroe from Middlebury, underway with the Collector's Tour here in the fall of 2024. I'm in southern Idaho now in the Albion Range, and this is Dust Collector 16. I put Dust 16 out here at the beginning of the Dust Squared project because I wanted a collector that was northwest of Salt Lake City and the Great Salt Lake, something that could maybe intercept natural dust coming from the northwesterly direction before it arrived in that part of Utah. So Dust 16's been here ever since. It's been performing great. It's a beautiful location. It's always a fun one to come back to. The Dust Squared project, as I've mentioned before, is a component of the National Science Foundation funded Critical Zone Collaborative Network. Collaborative network is pretty straightforward, but critical zone might benefit from a little bit of definition. The idea of the critical zone is it's a new term for a somewhat older concept, but we're essentially talking about the skin of the earth, the thin skin where geology and ecology and biology and hydrology, soil science and society all intersect with one another. So to approach critical zone science requires that one not only think like a geologist or an ecologist, but rather think about the connections and the intersections and the interactions between these different fields, which we often approach as if they're completely independent from one another. The critical zone's critical to you and me because it's where we live. It's where our food comes from. It's where resources like wood and timber come from. It's where our water is purified and recycled. And the critical zone's also critical because it's vulnerable. We've shown time and time again that we can mess up the critical zone, or at least cause changes in the critical zone that sometimes have unforeseen effects. One thing that's really exciting about critical zone science is this requirement that one think in a transdisciplinary way. It's to really think about critical zone science requires that one not just act like a geologist or a soil scientist, but rather think about those connections, think about what happens when you blur or blend those things together. It's hard to do, or it's hard for me to do anyway, as someone who's trained in a more classical sense as an earth scientist. One thing that's really been exciting, though, in the last decade or so is to see the new wave of early career researchers who are fundamentally critical zone scientists. That's how they were trained all the way through school. And I think we're seeing the dawn, basically, of a next big leap forward for critical zone research, not just as part of the US collaborative network, but in places all over the world. So Dust Squared is looking at the dust cycle as part of the critical zone in the southwestern US, with extrapolations possible to settings all over the world. There's other aspects of the National Science Foundation funded Critical Zone Collaborative Network that are looking at the urban critical zone or dryland critical zone or coastal critical zone and managed landscapes critical zones and agricultural settings and so on. It's really been exciting to see how this has all moved forward in the last several years. And I have high hopes for the next wave of research ideas and people who are involved in that research. So with that, I'm going to get to work on emptying Dust 16 on this beautiful morning. Thank you, as always, for watching this video. Thanks in this case to the Sawtooth National Forest for permission to deploy Dust 16 here for the duration of the project. And thanks always to the National Science Foundation for their support of Dust Squared.